All right. Welcome back. We're headed off to Boston for what's known in the industry as a steaming pile of something. It's a train wreck. So, like I said, we're going back to Boston for DeCastro versus Abrams. So let's jump to the docket and scroll down. So, if you recall, on the 24th of April, Delete Lawz filed his second supplemental complaint, which the court has treated as a amended complaint, and Google did its motion to dismiss, and Delete Lawz opposed the motion to dismiss, and that's motion to transfer or dismiss. I'm saying motion to dismiss because that's what Google really wants, but and Delete Lawz opposition was so unhinged that Google filed for leave to file a reply to his opposition, which he is now opposing. And I, I've scanned the opposition, and I'm just going to say from the outset, if I filed that, I'd be sanctioned by now. It's like a little snark is fine. Insults are not. He's crossed a line. I have a feeling that Judge Burroughs is not going to do anything about it because he's pro se, and she's just going to get rid of him in due course. That being said, let's jump into the opposition to the motion for leave to reply. So we're still in the United States District Court for the District of Massachusetts in DeCastro versus Abrams et al. And this is titled in the caption, Opposition to Defendant YouTube, Google LLC's motion for leave to file a reply in support of its motion to transfer or dismiss. Introduction. Plaintiff Jose DeCastro offers the following response to defendant YouTube, Google LLC's YouTube or defendants motion for leave to file a reply in support of Google LLC's motion to transfer or dismiss. In support of this response, plaintiff submits a memorandum of law which is fully incorporated herein. In general, YouTube's 49-page motion to transfer case to Northern District of California, motion to dismiss for failure to state a claim, was filed with many defects and failed to raise arguments. I thought they did a pretty good job of laying out their argument. Their defects were not anticipating his response. See, a reply, you don't get to broaden the scope. It narrows. It's focusing on issues brought up in the response, in the opposition. It's narrowing it down. In that motion, YouTube asked the court to do its work for it by vaguely asserting that plaintiff's complaint had glaring pleading failures, but that the court need not even look at those because plaintiff had filed in the wrong court. YouTube goes on to only argue that the most obvious problem besides that, in that plaintiff didn't allege that the copyrighted works were registered. That is an awful sentence to read. That's just awful. And I've mentioned before that you can tell there are at least 3 different people who have written motions for Delete Lawz, but you can usually tell when it's Delete Lawz himself. This one is obviously written by Delete Lawz. How do we know? Because it's written exactly the way he speaks. You can see this being one of his videos. It's just that bad. It's that aggravating. And once again, that I just don't get how he gets off on this. The court asked, or YouTube asked the court to do its work for it, meaning YouTube asked the court to do YouTube's work for YouTube by vaguely asserting that Delete Lawz complaint had glaring pleading failures. Because it does. It it does. He's going to insult Google's lawyers once again, saying, well, they clearly didn't read it. But just for a recap, let's go back to the second supplemental complaint. How is this not a pleading failure? This entire thing. How is this not a pleading failure? I mean, it's pursuant to FRCP 15D, Jose de Castro hereby files this second supplemental complaint to its first amended complaint and supplemental complaint in connection with its federal claim of copyright infringement. This supplement adds new claims for events that have occurred since the filing of the first amended complaint. Further, plaintiff supplements facts in copyrighted works and alleges as follows. Introduction. Since the filing of the first amended complaint and supplemental complaint, all defendants, including unknown ones, have committed additional copyright and DMCA violations against plaintiff. Factual background. URLs of plaintiff's new copyrighted content since the first supplemental complaint are in Exhibit 1. Supplemental to Count 1, copyright infringement. Infringements of my copyrighted works have been published, including but not limited to at the following URLs against all defendants. And then a whole bunch of YouTube URLs, and that's it. How? Where's the successful pleading? I mean, he's upset because Google vaguely asserts that plaintiff's complaint had glaring pleading failures. His entire complaint is a glaring pleading failure. It's just completely asinine. It's completely asinine for me. But once again, the court doesn't need to look at those because he did file in the wrong court. But they pled in the alternative, so the court is going to look at both issues, including the glaring pleading failures. And YouTube goes on to only argue the most obvious problem besides that, in that plaintiff didn't allege that the copyrighted works were registered. No, Google started there and they said, you don't need to go any further than this, but we will. And they said what I've said all along. In order to successfully plead copyright, at a minimum, you have to say this work by the defendant infringed on this work of mine, the plaintiff, by doing this. This is how it infringed. Where is it? Where did he do that? Nowhere. And Google rightly said he didn't do it. That alone means a 12b6 motion should be granted. Motion to dismiss for failure to state a claim upon which relief can be granted. If a judge granted relief to this complaint, that judge would be impeached. That judge would be removed from the bench. Because there's nothing there. But continuing, now YouTube wants to attempt to cure the deficiencies in its motion by adding additional arguments that it didn't initially raise. Not that a reply brief cures the deficiencies in a motion. The fact remains that YouTube's motion is requesting specific relief that will not be amended, or that will not be amended by a reply. The fact remains that YouTube's motion is requesting specific relief that will not be amended by a reply. You don't amend things with a reply. What's he trying? And like I said, YouTube is not curing deficiencies in its initial pleading. Its initial pleading was great. It was great. What they are doing is they are responding to his opposition. He raised new things in his opposition that Google didn't plead in its complaint, in its motion. So YouTube, although they don't have to, because the judge can look at both motions on their face and say, Google wins. But why chance it? Address his additional arguments. That's what a reply brief is for. Points and authorities. YouTube has not cited any rule that allows it to reply to an opposition. YouTube has cited Local Rule 7.1b3, which requires permission to file a reply, but YouTube has not cited in its motion any authority that would allow the court to grant relief under the instant motion to make said reply. Yes, Rule 7.1b3 requires permission to file a reply. So they used Rule 7.1b3 to say, Judge Burroughs, may we file a reply? That's the authority. But YouTube has not cited in its motion any authority that would allow the court to grant relief under the instant motion to make said reply. Except Rule 7.1b3. Besides which, in the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure, a reply is appropriate. It's just the Massachusetts District Court limits replies to, you've got to ask permission first. The general rule is you get to do a reply. But B, plaintiff raised no new arguments. Except he did. He did. His new argument was, I have a copyright registered, which he has never pled. Never. Where has where's the registration in here? Where's the registration? That's a new fact. That's a new argument. They want to address that. YouTube falsely alleges that plaintiff raised new issues in plaintiff's opposition, which is ludicrous. Plaintiff was merely pointing out errors in YouTube's two arguments, where YouTube argues, 1, failure to allege registration of the copyright, and 2, suing in the wrong court. But you have failed to allege registration of a copyright. It's not there. You still haven't alleged registration of a specific copyright. You've alluded that, well, the defense can find it, they just haven't looked hard enough. The court can find it, they just haven't looked hard enough. I don't need to provide it for them. Plaintiff clearly pointed out answers in the way of, 1, a Supreme Court's decision has made it clear that a copyright complaint does not require allegations that the work is registered unless the issue is raised. And 2, the terms of service does not apply. A Supreme Court decision has made it clear that a copyright complaint does not require allegations that the work is registered until the issue is raised? Where? What? I'm not going to go back to his opposition. But any citations, I guarantee he misunderstood. Because all of the case law I have read, the statutory law I have read, you have to have it registered in order to sue. That's a baseline issue. And if it's a baseline issue, you have to plead it in your complaint. Or if it's not in the complaint, for the purposes of a motion to dismiss, if it's not in your complaint, it doesn't exist. It's not there. For the purposes of a motion to dismiss, here's what the court does. It assumes that the facts alleged in the complaint are true. For the purposes of the motion to dismiss, it assumes the facts alleged are true in the complaint. And then it says, if these facts are true, is there enough here to satisfy the requirements of this cause of action? And it's only looking at the complaint. In this case, no, because the complaint does not contain allegations of a registered copyright. He fails. But apparently, YouTube could have easily checked the catalog of registered copyrights prior to filing its motion, but instead, YouTube relied on a baseless hope that plaintiff had not registered any works. In doing so, YouTube relied on the argument that plaintiff had not alleged any registration at all, not that the registration was untimely. That's because, and hear me out, you didn't allege registration. It's not YouTube's job to go out and find the registration and say, hey, judge, I know it's not in the complaint, and we've said he hasn't alleged it, but here it is. It's not the defendant's job to find it and bring it to the judge. It's your job to allege it in the complaint. YouTube asserts that plaintiff is claiming that a different license applies, but plaintiff did not make those claims. Plaintiff only points out a different and more relevant section of the TOS that YouTube attached in its exhibits. So you didn't respond to YouTube. You said, no, judge, this. That gives YouTube reason to say, yeah, but no, we're still right. That's a new argument. You saying a different part applies. You saying that this different and more relevant section of the TOS should be what controls is a new argument. It's a different argument. Google gets a chance to respond to that. I mean, let's see. So he's saying YouTube wants to attempt to cure the deficiencies in its motion by adding additional arguments. They're responding to his new arguments. I should say replying to his new arguments since it's a reply brief. C, if YouTube is able to make a reply with new arguments, it doesn't add those arguments to the motion which is before this court, and plaintiff will require a surreply to point out the deficiencies in YouTube's new arguments. It will be a waste of this court's time and cause unnecessary expense to the other parties. In plaintiff's surreply, he would argue, one, well, before I get to number one, reply briefs, even though you have to ask for them in Massachusetts, reply briefs exist. Surreplies also exist, but they are exceedingly rare. Just for, this is so ridiculous. If Delete Lawz expects a surreply, here's what would have to happen for that to be granted. Google would have to raise new arguments. At a minimum, Google replying to his new arguments doesn't grant him a surreply. That's ridiculous. It's also ridiculous, especially knowing the history of this case, for Delete Lawz to now be worried about this being a waste of the court's time and causing unnecessary expense to the other parties. That's his goal. So not only does this ring completely hollow, but it's also not his job. His argument should be, this is a waste of my time. This causes me unnecessary time and expense. Google, because Google is the only other party incurring expense in doing this reply brief, because Kate and Josh are not participating in this. They're sitting on the sidelines watching this. If Google was worried about the time and expense of a reply brief, Google would not ask for a reply brief. Funny how that works, isn't it? But also, even before looking at his arguments here, or potential arguments, in plaintiff's surreply, he would argue. Now, you may recall, in Google's request to file a reply, which this is in opposition to, in asking for the reply, Google said, if a reply is allowed, this will be the gist of our argument. Here's the thing, though. Delete Lawz had already filed his opposition. Google already knew what they were replying to. Delete Lawz has some idea, but to say, well, this is what I'll reply to before it's even filed, that's just silly. But let's look at his number one argument for a future surreply. YouTube inappropriately raises the alleged untimely copyright registration of plaintiff's video, but the video was actually registered prior to the second supplemental complaint, in where it is mentioned. Once again, where is it mentioned that he has a registration for that copyright? Nowhere. And let's jump to Exhibit 1 from the supplemental complaint. These are his videos that he claims were, or possibly were, or might have been infringed. YouTube, 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 YouTube. Oh, those are YouTube shorts. Sorry. More YouTube shorts. So remember, he's saying the video in question isn't on YouTube, even though every single video he has in his pleading is on YouTube. And he's saying it was registered before the second supplemental complaint where it is mentioned. Except it's not. So, which is it? As YouTube is clearly unaware of how supplemental complaints work, that would get me disciplined. I must explain to them that they contain claims that have occurred since the original complaint was made. It was YouTube's decided, and the court allowed YouTube to wait to file an answer or dispositive motion until after the plaintiff's second supplemental complaint was filed. YouTube waiting appears to be what actually made YouTube's new arguments untimely. Huh? Plaintiff's second supplemental complaint was not opposed by any party and was granted by this court. The video that YouTube describes was registered prior to plaintiff's second supplemental complaint, which contains the claim for that video. This makes YouTube's argument irrelevant that a copyright registration must occur prior to filing a complaint, which YouTube supports only with unpublished, irrelevant case anyway. Now, Delete Lawz has some nerve saying, well, YouTube only supports this with an unpublished, irrelevant case. Well, I'm not even going to open his prior motions. I'm just going to say he has some nerve. Because as you know, I've pointed this out many times. Delete Lawz relies heavily on unpublished cases. And most of them are irrelevant too. And if they're not irrelevant, they're misapplied. But which unpublished irrelevant case is he upset about? It's the Cortez Ramos versus Martin Morales, a 2020 case from the District of Puerto Rico. Now, you may remember when I read that citation the other day, I commented that it had addendum on the citation saying this is a collection. So basically, Cortez Ramos, if you were to open it, it'll have a list of citations. So it's basically a bibliography, and Google cited the bibliography saying Cortez Ramos has collected all of these cases that we're incorporating by this one citation. But Cortez Ramos is an unpublished case that YouTube cites where in it was decided that where a copyright holder had filed a registration late, that the district court should not have dismissed the action with prejudice. Instead, it was decided that the action should have been dismissed without prejudice. Here, plaintiff has previously moved for voluntary dismissal without prejudice, but this court has denied it. That is completely different. That did not involve YouTube. Period. That but before I get too overheated, let's continue. Additionally, the copyright holder in Cortez Ramos could not cure the defect by amending the complaint. Here, plaintiff can cure any defect in failing to allege copyright registration by simply alleging registration in his second supplemental complaint. Here, YouTube has waived its right to additional 12b6 arguments, such as late registration, without amending its motion. Here, if plaintiff cannot amend its complaint, only the claims in plaintiff's first amended complaint under 17 U.S.C. section 106 sub 1 will be lost, but the first and second supplemental claims would survive, as well as claims under 17 U.S.C. section 501, which don't require registration according to statute. Huh? Huh? Only claims under the first amended complaint will be lost, but the first and second supplemental claims would survive. No. I mean, even if, let's humor him, even if he's allowed well, he'd have to amend period in order to have any claim survive. But then it could only conceivably like the only conceivable thing that could survive would be the Hammer Boy video, which let's face it, the court has said, well, let's ignore that. Let's ignore the registration requirement. Let's ignore the registration requirement. For starters, Judge Burroughs said any further amendments are going to require much more exacting scrutiny, meaning this is your last bite at the apple. So here's what I think is going to happen. This is what makes the most sense. She'll deny his inevitable request to amend. And she'll dismiss for failure to state a claim, and it won't be based on his failure to register. It'll be because even if he registered, that's not a claim upon which relief can be granted. Neither are any of his previous complaints. He has not provided the court a complaint upon which relief can be granted. His pleading is entirely deficient, not just in regards to this one issue. It fails in other ways. The court can just dismiss on that. The court can say, look, even if you amend based on what you want to amend it on, it still fails. Bye-bye. Additionally, Cortez Ramos ultimately relies on a district court case in the Second Circuit where the court admits to parting ways with several courts that have held that a post-registration amendment can cure the defect in a complaint filed before a copyright claim was registered within the meaning of Section 411A. See Malibu Media LLC v. Doe from the SDNY in April 2nd, 2019. But once again, Google was not saying, hey, court, this is the holding in Cortez Ramos. They were saying, hey, court, here's a whole bunch of citations listed in Cortez Ramos. That's how they cited it. So to say, well, Cortez Ramos was decided on an SDNY case where they say in the SDNY case that they were creating a circuit split. Boston, Massachusetts is in the First Circuit. So it doesn't matter anyways. But continuing, plaintiff has already conceded that a copyright complaint under 17 U.S.C. Section 106 sub 1 can be dismissed where it is raised that the work has not been pre-registered, and that work, in fact, has not been pre-registered. That fact did not happen in this action. YouTube did not raise that matter, and the work has, in fact, been registered. Plaintiff has also previously argued that the U.S. Supreme Court has said that a copyright complaint does not require allegations of copyright registration in Feist Publications versus Rural Telephone Service Company from 1991. I'm not going to bother looking that up right now. Like I said, everything I've seen requires pre-registration. But so if it requires pre-registration, the only way it's going to come up is if you plead it. If it's not pled, it doesn't exist. That's not just the case with copyright registration. If he's alleging assault based on Kate's boob, he's got to plead, she hit me with her boob, or threatened to hit me with her boob for assault under the common law. But if it's not there, it doesn't exist. Same thing with copyright. Same thing with the copyright registration requirement. If it's not pled in the complaint, it doesn't exist for the purposes of a 12b6 motion. YouTube wants to add new allegations based on moot points on registration. In general, courts have agreed that they lack the jurisdiction to make a ruling on a moot issue, but have done so only in the matter of public interest. See Muskrat v. U.S., a Supreme Court case from 1911, and Flast v. Cohen, a Supreme Court case from 1968. He's right. Mootness, a moot issue, can't be ruled on. His failure to allege a required element is not moot. Plaintiff never published the key video in its complaint. YouTube says that this fact contradicts plaintiff's first amended complaint, but the key video in this complaint was not mentioned until plaintiff's request to make a second supplemental complaint, and is also mentioned in the second supplemental complaint itself. The video is obviously not mentioned at all in plaintiff's first amended complaint, except under the confused facts asserted by YouTube. The key video is also properly registered according to YouTube's argument in the instant motion. Let's go back to the supplemental complaint. Where? 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 You have not. I mean, you've alleged that all these videos have possibly infringed on all of these YouTube videos. Where have you mentioned a non-YouTube video in this supplemental complaint? It's like we're in Bizarro court. It doesn't exist, therefore he pled it. Conclusion. Again, YouTube should at least be required to read the complaints in their entirety and plead relevant arguments, and to wait to plead its arguments until it has leave to do so. Plaintiff prays this court deny YouTube's motion to file a reply to its opposition, as plaintiff has raised no new issues. YouTube's intent to make new arguments would also be fruitless. Oh, he's aggravating. Oh, he's aggravating. But on the bright side, going back to the docket, because I've been slow making this, on June 5th, 2 days after Delete Lawz opposition, 3 days after Google filed for leave, Judge Burroughs entered an order granting leave to reply. Counsel, using electronic case filing system, should now file the document for which leave to file has been granted in accordance with CM-ECF administrative procedures. Counsel must include leave to file granted on date of order in the caption of the document. Entered by Karen Folan. Hey, a different clerk than Caitlin McManus. So that's where we are. So Google promised it within 10 days of the leave to file. So by June 15th, we should have their reply. And June 16th, we should have Delete Lawz asking for a Surreply. Oh. So now that I'm all nice and heated, I think that's where I'm going to leave you tonight. And I say tonight because it's night when I'm recording this, even though it'll be published to you guys first thing in the morning, at least Utah time. So hopefully tomorrow I will finally get back to Las Vegas and do the LVMPD's motion to dismiss in DeCastro versus LVMPD. I know I promised that a while ago, but hey, I got a few things that took priority, namely this and the Schofield versus Guillard motion to dismiss the counterclaims. So, and speaking of Schofield versus Guillard, so their Delete Lawz has been crowing today about getting a default entered against Kate in the California case that I've more or less abandoned because I got bored with it. Although I still will probably at some point, if I get around to it, look at Blue Bacon's slap motion. So for my analysis on that, go watch a couple videos ago where I in the Schofield versus Guillard case, the TikTok psychic, where the court denied the entry of a default judgment and granted the TikTok psychic leave to file an answer. So basically, the court said, yeah, she's in default. We're taking her out of default. No default judgment. Carry on. I'm not going to speculate on Kate's strategy, but that's what's going to happen eventually. So Delete Lawz is celebrating today. He's going to be furious in the future because that's what's going to happen. Analysis on the Schofield versus Guillard video. But with that, I'll probably see you tomorrow for the LVMPD video. Thanks for joining me. Do the YouTube things, and I will see you later. Bye-bye.